The morning started like any other, but as soon as I stepped outside, my heart dropped. My carefully stacked firewood, my winter survival stash, was missing. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe the neighbor's kids, but then I saw her, Karen, the infamous HOA tyrant, walking away with a smug grin. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about her antics, but I never imagined she'd cross this line. She wasn't just taking my firewood, she was flaunting her power. My pulse raced. What would she do next? I grabbed my phone, trying to document everything without her noticing, and followed at a safe distance. Karen's confidence was staggering, she seemed untouchable. She shoved logs into a wheelbarrow with a strange intensity, muttering about rules and community standards. I couldn't understand what any of this had to do with my firewood. I felt rage boiling inside, but I also knew acting recklessly could escalate the situation. I needed a plan. I decided to film everything, every action, every word, every suspicious glance. That's when I noticed the log at the very top of her pile. It wasn't ordinary. Smoke faintly curled from it, and a small tag warned explosive. My stomach sank. She had no idea, or worse, she did. My mind raced through possibilities: call 911, intervene physically, or record and expose. Adrenaline surged, and my hands shook. I knew this could go viral instantly. Everyone online hated Karen for her endless HOA violations and petty power trips, and now she'd gone too far. I took a deep breath, stayed hidden behind a bush, and filmed the setup. Her expression shifted: excitement, impatience, and a hint of mischief. I realized then that this was no accident. Karen had created a situation that could literally explode, and I had the footage to prove it. As she prepared the log, my mind raced for the safest approach. One wrong move, and this could end very badly. My next steps would determine not just my safety, but how I could finally hold Karen accountable. Every second felt like an eternity as I crouched low, camera ready, heart pounding. Karen adjusted the log as if it were a trophy, completely unaware of the danger she held. I stayed hidden, holding my breath, filming every move. My mind raced with the risks: one wrong step could send her, me, or the neighborhood into chaos. I could see her lips move, muttering about enforcing rules and setting an example, but her obsession with control had completely blinded her to the hazard she carried. The log's tag wasn't a joke, it was a clear warning. Smoke drifted upward, curling lazily at first, then thickening ominously. I knew the situation was escalating faster than anyone could anticipate. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, curious about the strange noises and her frantic movements, but I gestured subtly for them to stay back. I had to protect them and myself while capturing proof of her recklessness. Karen didn't notice me filming, her focus was entirely on moving the log to her designated firewood area, which was suspiciously close to her own backyard shed. My stomach churned. The shed was old, wooden, and full of dry materials. One spark could ignite a disaster. I contemplated calling 911, but what would I say without concrete evidence? That's when she mishandled the log. It wobbled precariously, and the smoke flared. Panic surged through me. I raised my camera, zooming in to make sure every angle was captured. Seconds felt like minutes. Her eyes widened as she realized the log was unstable. A loud crack echoed, neighbors screamed. I lunged forward, maintaining my distance, ready to shout a warning. Karen froze, realizing too late the danger she had created. The log teetered, then fell onto the dry wood pile with a thunderous impact. Sparks flew instantly, igniting small flames. Chaos erupted: smoke, fire, and panic filled the backyard. I stayed back, documenting the entire moment while mentally preparing evacuation routes. My phone captured her frantic attempts to control the fire, tossing logs and shoving garden tools in a desperate effort to contain it. Heart pounding, I realized this footage wasn't just proof of theft, it was evidence of her complete disregard for safety. This was bigger than I had imagined. The fire crackled violently, smoke curling into the sky, and Karen's panic escalated with every passing second. I stayed hidden, filming everything, knowing this was the proof I needed. Neighbors shouted, grabbing hoses and buckets, while some called 911. Karen's smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by fear, and I could see the realization hit her: she had gone too far. The exploding log was no joke, and her obsession with control had nearly caused a disaster. Sparks jumped dangerously close to the shed, threatening the surrounding houses. I could feel my heart pounding, the adrenaline pushing me to stay sharp. I narrated quietly into my phone, explaining the situation for context, making sure every critical moment was documented. Karen was running around in circles, frantically attempting to smother the flames with her hands, but every move she made seemed to make it worse. At one point, she tripped over a garden hose, sending herself sprawling into a pile of smoldering logs. Neighbors gasped. I realized this footage wasn't just valuable, it was a record of her reckless behavior, a combination of theft, negligence, and sheer audacity. As firefighters arrived, Karen tried to explain herself, but everyone could see the truth. Her lies, her theft, her complete disregard for safety, it was all laid bare. I watched as the authorities questioned her, and the neighbors whispered in disbelief. Meanwhile, I calmly showed the footage to the fire department and HOA officials, highlighting how her actions had escalated to a public safety hazard. Karen's arrogance had turned into humiliation in a matter of minutes. Her attempts to manipulate the situation failed spectacularly. The fire was contained, no serious injuries occurred, but the incident had made one thing clear: Karen was no longer untouchable. I knew I had to act fast to make sure her reckless behavior wouldn't continue. Using the footage, I prepared a report, combining visual proof, neighbor statements, and official records. This was more than evidence, it was a story that would hold her accountable and warn the neighborhood. Finally, as the last flames were extinguished, Karen slumped in defeat, and I realized how powerful a single person's courage and preparedness could be when facing someone like her. This moment wasn't just about Firewood, it was about justice, exposure, and reclaiming safety for everyone around. With the fire finally contained, the neighborhood slowly returned to a tense calm. Karen sat on the curb, soaked in sweat, ash on her clothes, humiliated in front of everyone. I approached cautiously, keeping my camera rolling, capturing her expressions of disbelief and fear. The footage I had was undeniable proof of theft, reckless endangerment, and total disregard for the community. I showed the recording to the HOA board and the authorities. They watched in silence, disbelief spreading across their faces as Karen's actions unfolded frame by frame. It wasn't just about stolen firewood anymore, it was a blatant public safety hazard, a violation of every HOA rule she claimed to enforce. Neighbors came forward, adding statements of past incidents, minor disputes that now formed a clear pattern of harassment and control. Karen had built her little empire of intimidation and fear, but it had collapsed spectacularly. The authorities issued formal citations, fines, and warnings, making it clear that such reckless behavior would no longer be tolerated. Meanwhile, the HOA was forced to review their policies, implement stricter oversight, and ensure accountability. For the first time, Karen's reputation was tarnished, and the community saw her as exactly what she was, a bully hiding behind rules. I took a deep breath, reflecting on the chaos, the danger, and the lessons learned. Courage, preparation, and recording the truth had turned a potentially disastrous situation into a public revelation that ensured justice. The firewood was replaced, safety measures put in place, and the neighborhood slowly began to recover, more united than ever. People thanked me for documenting everything, for speaking up when others stayed silent, and for showing that even one person could make a difference. Karen, meanwhile, faced the consequences of her obsession, proving that unchecked arrogance and recklessness cannot survive scrutiny. I finally realized that day, standing up, filming, and acting responsibly doesn't just protect you, it protects everyone around you. The exploding log incident would be remembered in the neighborhood for years, not as a tragedy, but as a story of courage, accountability, and exposing the truth. And as I stacked my new firewood safely, I knew one thing for certain: nobody steals from me again without consequences. In the days following the explosive firewood incident, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip, but also relief. People came forward to share their experiences with Karen's small thefts, intimidation, petty fines, and constant overreach. My footage became the centerpiece of discussions, a vivid record showing just how reckless and controlling she had been. HOA officials finally acknowledged that her behavior had gone unchecked for far too long, agreeing to implement stricter oversight, transparency measures, and consequences for anyone abusing authority. I met with neighbors one by one, sharing insights and evidence, helping them understand how easily unchecked power can escalate. Conversations that once felt tense now turned to collaboration, as the community began strategizing ways to prevent future abuse. I realized my documentation wasn't just a personal shield, it had become a tool for collective empowerment. Meanwhile, Karen was forced to face the fallout. Her reputation had crumbled, neighbors no longer tolerated her antics, and she struggled to maintain the image of control she had so carefully curated. Emails, fines, and official HOA communications now bore scrutiny. Every word she sent could be traced and verified. She attempted to argue her case in HOA meetings, but the evidence was irrefutable, and even her allies had begun to distance themselves. Publicly, the story of the exploding log became an example of what can happen when authority is misused, quickly circulating online in neighborhood forums and social media groups. People praised my calm, methodical approach, emphasizing documentation over confrontation. Reflecting on the incident, I understood how important preparation, observation, and patience had been. I didn't intervene physically when danger loomed, I prioritized safety while capturing proof. That strategy had preserved lives, property, and my ability to hold Karen accountable. In the end, justice wasn't about revenge, it was about exposure, accountability, and prevention. The firewood was safely replaced, new safety protocols were established, and the neighborhood regained a sense of trust. I now knew that courage combined with strategy could neutralize even the most reckless authority. What had started as a personal confrontation over stolen firewood had evolved into a story of empowerment, vigilance, and communal resilience. Karen's lesson was clear: no one is untouchable when truth and evidence are on your side. Weeks after the exploding log incident, the neighborhood finally began to breathe easier. HOA meetings were no longer dominated by fear or intimidation, discussions focused on safety, fairness, and community collaboration. Karen's reputation had plummeted, neighbors avoided her, and online forums chronicled her reckless behavior in detail. Her attempts to regain control were futile. Every move she made was scrutinized, and the authorities made it clear that future violations would have serious consequences. I continued to share my footage with the HOA board, law enforcement, and even local news outlets. The visual proof of her theft and reckless endangerment created undeniable pressure. What started as a personal violation, a few stolen logs, had exposed a pattern of abuse, harassment, and misuse of authority. Neighbors began to speak up about their own experiences, revealing smaller but persistent transgressions that had been overlooked for years. Together, the community drafted new policies, including clear reporting mechanisms, verification procedures for fines, and regular safety audits. The sense of unity strengthened the neighborhood in ways I hadn't anticipated. Karen, meanwhile, was left to navigate the consequences alone. Her friends and allies had abandoned her, and her attempts to challenge the board's decisions were dismissed. The very fear she had instilled now worked against her, making her isolation complete. I reflected on how a single moment, the tipping point of the exploding log, had catalyzed this change. Documentation, patience, and courage had transformed a potentially dangerous incident into a lesson for everyone involved. I was able to protect not just myself but my neighbors, ensuring that authority could no longer be abused unchecked. The firewood was replaced, safety measures implemented, and Karen's influence neutralized. Community meetings now encouraged transparency, discussion, and accountability. As I stacked my own logs safely for the coming winter, I felt a sense of accomplishment. What had begun as theft, fear, and chaos ended as empowerment, vigilance, and a stronger neighborhood. The story of the firewood, the explosive log, and the downfall of Karen would be told for years as a cautionary tale. One thing was certain: accountability always wins when truth is documented, shared, and acted upon. Courage, preparation, and evidence, not anger, had changed everything. Backhand index pointing right. Even after Karen's initial downfall, the ripple effects of her reckless behavior continued to unfold. The neighborhood had learned a powerful lesson: no act of intimidation could go unchallenged. Parents discussed fire safety with their children, neighbors organized community watch meetings, and everyone began documenting interactions with the HOA more carefully. Karen's presence still lingered as a cautionary tale, but the fear she once instilled had transformed into awareness and vigilance. I stayed engaged, attending HOA meetings, providing guidance, and sharing insights on how to protect the community from future overreach. Karen tried to regain influence, subtly sending letters, questioning fines, attempting to stir disputes, but each attempt was met with evidence, eyewitness accounts, and collective resistance. The power she wielded for years was gone, replaced by transparency and accountability. I realized the real victory wasn't simply in exposing her theft or surviving the exploding log incident, it was in empowering others to stand up, speak out, and demand fairness. New policies were implemented: no single board member could unilaterally enforce fines, all complaints required multiple witnesses, and fire safety protocols were standardized. The neighborhood transformed from a place of silent fear into a community of vigilance and mutual support. Neighbors thanked me repeatedly, not only for my courage but for showing that documentation, patience, and strategy could neutralize even the most reckless authority figure. Karen, on the other hand, became a living example of what happens when arrogance and carelessness collide. The HOA board now scrutinized every action, every decision, and every communication. Public meetings became forums for discussion rather than intimidation, and residents regained trust in the systems that once oppressed them. I often reflected on the exploding log moment, realizing it was a catalyst, not just an event. A simple act of theft escalated into chaos, exposing patterns of control, negligence, and fear. And while the firewood had been replaced and the immediate danger gone, the lessons endured. Courage combined with careful planning and evidence created a blueprint for accountability. Karen's downfall was permanent, but more importantly, the neighborhood's resilience and vigilance would remain long after. In the end, a single log, stolen and mishandled, had transformed an entire community, proving that one person's actions, backed by courage and preparation, could inspire lasting change. Months had passed since the exploding log incident, and the neighborhood had undergone a quiet revolution. Karen's influence had evaporated completely, replaced by transparency, accountability, and a collective sense of empowerment. Residents no longer feared her; instead, they monitored, documented, and openly discussed issues with the HOA. Board members now knew that every decision was under scrutiny, and any attempt at manipulation or intimidation would be met with immediate, verifiable evidence. I continued to serve as a point of guidance, helping neighbors understand their rights, proper documentation, and ways to address disputes safely. Karen herself had become almost invisible, her attempts to regain control ignored or dismissed. Emails went unanswered, meetings were avoided, and neighbors kept their distance. The firewood theft, the dangerous log, and the public exposure of her recklessness had left a permanent mark on her reputation. The community's response, however, had grown stronger. People collaborated, checked in on one another, and created safety and reporting procedures that would outlast any individual's temporary influence. HOA meetings became forums for dialogue rather than confrontation. I watched the transformation with a sense of pride and relief, knowing that my careful documentation, patience, and courage had sparked a wider change. The exploding log incident had not just stopped Karen's abuses, it had ignited awareness, accountability, and a culture of vigilance. Local authorities, having reviewed my evidence, instituted stricter compliance rules and safety audits, ensuring that no one could weaponize the HOA against residents again. The Firewood, once stolen and nearly catastrophic, became a symbol, a reminder that unchecked arrogance and negligence can escalate into real danger, and that courage, preparation, and strategy can neutralize even the most reckless individuals. I often reflected on the sequence of events, realizing how a seemingly small confrontation over firewood escalated into a public lesson about power, responsibility, and community solidarity. Karen had lost her grip entirely, but the neighborhood had gained far more trust, cohesion, and an understanding that vigilance is the ultimate safeguard. Families felt safer, children played without fear, and discussions about fairness and accountability were normalized. The story of stolen firewood, the exploding log, and Karen's downfall would be told for years, not as gossip, but as a testament to the impact one determined person can have when standing up for truth and safety. By the time the final HOA meeting rolled around, Karen's presence was almost non-existent. She had lost all credibility, allies, and authority, her previous influence replaced by distrust and scrutiny. Residents entered the meeting with confidence, prepared to hold the board accountable and ensure no one could ever misuse power again. I brought my footage and notes, a meticulous record of every reckless act, theft, and safety violation. The video of the exploding log played on a projector, shocking anyone who had doubted the severity of Karen's actions. Gasps echoed through the room as her reckless behavior unfolded in front of the board and the community. Karen attempted to defend herself, but her words were met with pointed questions, evidence-backed rebuttals, and unwavering neighborhood resolve. The board issued formal sanctions, fines, restrictions on authority, and strict oversight procedures. Karen could no longer dictate rules, punish neighbors, or manipulate situations to her advantage. The entire HOA learned an important lesson about accountability, transparency, and the consequences of unchecked power. Meanwhile, neighbors shared stories of past petty thefts, intimidation, and harassment, each anecdote reinforcing the pattern of abuse and strengthening the community's determination to prevent future incidents. The Firewood incident, once a private grievance, had transformed into a symbol of justice, courage, and vigilance. For me, the experience had been exhausting, nerve-wracking, and at times terrifying, but it had also been empowering. I realized that careful documentation, patience, and strategy were more effective than anger or confrontation. Courage paired with preparation had changed the outcome completely. Karen's downfall became a permanent lesson. Recklessness and abuse are always exposed when people stand up together and demand accountability. As the meeting concluded, the neighborhood erupted in quiet applause and nods of approval. Smiles replaced fear, and trust slowly returned. Children played freely, neighbors interacted openly, and HOA operations finally became fair and transparent. I knew the exploding log story would be retold countless times, but not as mere gossip. It would serve as a guide for resisting abuse and defending truth. Karen's reign of intimidation had ended, and the neighborhood had emerged stronger, more connected, and vigilant. What began as stolen firewood and reckless mischief had transformed into a powerful lesson: when courage, documentation, and community unite, even the most reckless authority figures are held accountable. And from that day forward, the neighborhood was no longer afraid. They were empowered, vigilant, and united, forever changed by one explosive moment.